We will begin. Hello, everyone. I am Stephanie Schrader, and I oversee the Education Outreach and Diversity component of C-DEBI. Thanks for tuning in. This webinar series is presented by C-DEBI, and it focuses on professional development skills needed both in and out of academia. The series is held every other month, so stay tuned for our next seminar that will be held in April. Before we start, I will review some webinar reminders and tips. You will be muted during the talk. If you have a question, please use the chat box. You can enter in questions at any time, but we will save all questions until the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted shortly. Today's speaker is Dr. Julie Huber. She's an associate scientist at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution and also the C-DEBI Associate Director. She'll be discussing surviving and thriving in a soft money position. With that, I will turn it over to Julie.
All right. How does it sound, Stephanie?
Sounds great.
Good. Okay. So sorry you can't see me, but the internet is not working in my favor. So I'm going to be talking about life in a soft money position, and this is not anything I've ever talked about formally, so forgive me if it's a little bit messy. But I put together about 15 or 20 minutes worth of comments that I wanted to make and then open it up to questions. So I thought it was important before I kind of jumped into soft money to giving people a sense of my own background. Because obviously everything I'm going to subsequently say is shaped by those experiences. So I did my undergraduate work at a small liberal arts college in Florida called Eckerd College. And I had a very positive experience in that type of environment. And when I left college to go to graduate school, I was very convinced that I would end up back at one of these small colleges teaching undergraduates and giving them research opportunities. I then moved to a major state research university for my graduate work at the University of Washington. That's where I got my master's and PhD in oceanography. And that is when I began questioning whether or not I wanted to go back to a college because I got very hooked on large scale, sort of technically intense scientific research. So as I paused to make that decision, I pursued a postdoc at a small nonprofit here in Woods Hole called the Marine Biological Laboratory. I had a 2-year NASA astrobiology fellowship that funded that work. And the second year of my postdoc, I went on the job market. At that point, I decided not to apply to liberal arts colleges. I was really, again, kind of hooked on fast-paced research and had decided I wanted to try for a job that allowed for more of that. And so I interviewed at that stage both at research universities as well as nonprofit, and ended up taking a faculty job at the MBL, where I stayed for almost 10 years. Around year 6, I made the assistant to associate leap, and at the MBL there was no tenure option, but it was contract based. So I had letters of commitment for 3 years, then renewed for another 3, and then when I got promoted to associate for 5 years. About 10 years in, I made the decision that I wanted to move institutions for a variety of reasons. So I went on another job search, and this time I looked at both other nonprofits as well as considered leaving research altogether. And the reasons behind that were because of some administrative and leadership experience I gained at the MBL and some opportunities that came up. So I interviewed at that stage at both private universities, public universities, as well as a nonprofit, and ended up here at the Oceanographic, which is a nonprofit, a private institution, and came in with tenure at the associate scientist level. So that's my path into and staying in soft money. And as you'll note, at a number of times I considered leaving. But what I really want to talk about today is, you know, when we think about soft money, I think we have a lot of inherent biases when we think about it. And in fact, there's a lot of different types of soft money positions. And through talking to colleagues across the spectrum, as well as my own experiences, I just wanted to highlight a lot of the different types of soft money positions available, because I do feel like a large amount of our young folks kind of turn off those opportunities without a lot of knowledge about what's really involved in some of these soft money positions. So there's many shades of these types of opportunities, and it really spans a huge range. So, as defined, soft money is the portion of salary that is raised from grants, and that is in comparison to the money that comes from an institutional support. And at the far left, we have positions that are 100% grant supported. There's no teaching or administrative money available. There's no tenure. There's no contracts. And there are some examples of this, but most of them are actually in the medical school and research faculty realm, which I'm not going to be talking about much today because I think our audience and most of the C-DEBI community is not looking at medical school positions, and that's kind of a whole separate bag of issues. And at the other end, there are soft money positions where you raise a lot of your money from grants or very little, depending on the institution. There's money available for both teaching and administrative support, and in some cases, tenure or very solid contracts that guarantee some job security. So what sort of organizations have these soft money positions? I'm pretty much yet to encounter many that do not have soft money scientists. This ranges from government labs to nonprofit institutions. There's private companies and institutions. Most universities have research faculty or even tenured faculty that have some portion of their salary supported by soft money, medical schools, and others. And hold on. Oh, this is a bummer. My slide is empty. Hang on. Are you guys still there?
Yeah, we could see all the slides.
Did you see a blank slide though?
Not at all. We saw everything.
Okay. So that's confusing because it was blank for me. Okay. So there we go.
It's not blank for us.
Sorry. So so beyond hard money, beyond salary support from grants, what are some other sources of salary support that soft money scientists can draw from? I've listed just a few here. Obviously, at institutions that have teaching as part of their mission, there are opportunities to teach from undergraduate to the graduate level, to serve on mentoring committees, selection committees, and things like that. There are also opportunities for administrative support, whether that's committee service, doing things for the department, stuff like that. Some institutions provide salary support for writing grants, taking sabbatical, and other things like that. But interestingly, institutional support varies widely depending on where you are. And I wanted to show a couple of examples just from talking and kind of being around my colleagues for all these years. So I know many tenured faculty at state universities. These are research universities. And depending on the state budget line, they often have to raise anywhere between 3 to 7 months of their salary. And sometimes this is depends on their teaching duties, but this is very common even at the tenured full professor level. At the tenured level at private research universities, there usually is less expectation for raising grant money to cover your salary, in the range of absolutely none to about 3 months. And I think this is what most people think about, but in fact, this is, while common, not the most common way of getting institutional support. And then there's tenured faculty like me at nonprofit or other private institutions where you're expected to raise, anywhere from 6 to 12 months of your salary from grants. And then there's lots of other types of faculty. And, many of these are untenured, but that doesn't always mean they don't have job security, whether it's through a contract or some other agreement. And these are always good questions to ask people when thinking about moving to another institution. You know, what is your job security like? So research faculty at many of these large state universities often do have to raise a lot of their own salary support. Affiliated labs, either with a government agency or another institution, you know, a huge range from private, affiliated, government. I was just at a affiliated lab where all the faculty have to raise 6 months of their salary, and then talk to someone from a government lab who's required to raise all of it. So there's this really, really wide variation in how people support themselves at these various institutions. So when I was putting this together, I thought it might be useful to just kind of look at how I've charged my time over the last 10 years to give you a sense of how it's changed as I've moved along in my career. And it's also something that was very useful for me at these various transitions in my own career to think about. So as a soft money scientist, as many in consulting or other businesses are, I have to account for my time. I fill out a time card, and I have to charge my time to various projects. And so that means I have a really good paper record of how I've spent my time. And in the very first year of my faculty position, you know, over 75% of my salary was covered through institutional support to get me started. I had some incentives to get me to write grants. I had a kickback from the MBL that incentivized me to write more grants and bring in more money, which was great. And I was able to transfer 1 or 2 small grants that I gotten as a postdoc into that grant pool as well. At the MBL, I taught in an immersive summer or an immersive fall semester undergraduate program. So in my years there, that amount of teaching ranged between 4 to 10 or so % of my time. And you can see that over the first 3 years that the support I gained from grants obviously grew quite a bit, and I was not leaning on the institution quite so much for support. In years 4 to 6, you know, the lab had grown from just me and a technician to having a handful of postdocs and a grad student. We had undergrads coming in the summer. By that time, we had 5 or 6 grants going on. And so the bulk of the support was coming from both federally and privately funded grants. At that point, I made the leap from assistant to associate scientist. And when that happened, I began to get more involved in administrative and leadership opportunities at the institution, both at the faculty level and also in development and fundraising for the institution. And so you can see that blue bar actually grew again, but this time not so much because I needed it to keep my science going, but because I was doing a service to the institution. And that was certainly at the cost of writing more grants. And I also had some new teaching opportunities, again with undergraduates, that I wanted to try out. So that was a bit of a transition for me. And in those years, I did spend a good bit of my time doing administrative work for the institution. Toward the end of that period is when I considered leaving full-time research and moving into a job that involved mostly administration and leadership, and ultimately decided that I wanted to stay in science full-time. And so when I moved to the oceanographic, where I've been for less than a year, my bar shifted quite a bit. The first was that in getting to know a new institution, I didn't have a lot of leadership opportunities as I'm still figuring out how it all works. So I'm only serving on a small number of committees at this time. And the teaching here is at the graduate level, and I'm still trying to figure out how that graduate program works and how I want to contribute. So I've completely cut teaching out as I figure all of that out. So right now, this is what my funding portfolio looks like, but I can imagine it growing in different colors as time moves on. Importantly, though, this is simply how I've charged my time. How have I actually spent my time? And this is also a really good exercise. Especially as you move along in your career and the things that you thought you'd spend all your time doing, maybe you don't, in fact. So what I'm showing here is more granularity. So basically, you know, when I first started my job, I spent a ton of time working in the lab, doing field work, advising the few people in my laboratory, and then, you know, managing a lab, writing grants and papers, and things like that. Around year 3, I started taking out a little bit of service for my institution, and that purple bar there at the very end grew considerably, as I already noted, as I moved along. Things that stayed really steady, again, were lab management and budgeting and writing grants and papers. Even when I maybe wasn't doing as much work in the lab, I was still helping write grants and papers, and mentoring, in particular, students in the lab. And that grew as the grants grew and as the size of the lab also grew considerably. Another thing that's changed quite a bit in the last few years of my career is the time spent on service outside of the institution, whether that's seminars or panels, advisory, editorial duties. And I think these are all fairly common patterns that faculty at any institution experience as they move along in the career. Really less time in the lab, more time advising, and importantly, that gray bar is really enabling science for others, whether that's mentoring, whether that's communicating science in non-traditional ways, whether it's helping people get their foot in the door. And that's something I personally have really enjoyed as I've moved along and have had a lot of freedom to do. So why do I stay in soft money? Why did I never go back? Have I still not gone back to a small liberal arts college? Well, I just got really hooked on the fast-paced, flexible research environments that I was immersed in. They provided me with a lot of freedom. And in both cases, I had a really strong belief in the institutional mission of the places I've been and the people behind it. Importantly, these institutions have invested in me to succeed. At the very beginning of my faculty career, I was given, generous startups. I was, set up to succeed, incentives, and even making a mid-career move have been given the tools to succeed. And that has, built a lot of confidence into these decisions. I've also enjoyed being in relatively small organizations where there's not a lot of layers of administration. I can actually see my director's office from my office window here. And that isn't true at all soft money positions, obviously. Major research universities, which have a lot of layers of administration, also have a lot of soft money scientists, but it is one of the reasons that I have stayed private rather than going federal. One of the wonderful things that I have enjoyed about being in these positions is that I've had a lot of freedom to choose education goals that play to my strengths, and that hasn't been limited to teaching. I really love working with undergraduates in particular, and so I get to teach with them every fall through these immersive semester courses, and then I also get to partner with them every summer through internship opportunities. And in particular, the last decade have been working a lot with community college students, and it's been really wonderful to have that freedom to do that. In addition, at my previous institution, we did not have a very large graduate program, so instead I invested in postdocs, and I think I'm on my 12th or 13th postdoc to pass through my lab right now. And so I sort of skipped that graduate student training level, but now I'm in an institution that has a strong graduate program, so that might shift. But for the last decade, I've really played to the strengths of my institution and what I was really interested in, which was undergraduate teaching in particular. Some other things that keep me motivated. Grant writing has really helped me step out of my scientific comfort zone. It's true that we probably in soft money environments write more grants than others, and often I've written some very strange grants with science that I wasn't always at the top of my priority list, but has turned out to be very rewarding. I think there's only 2 grants I've written over the last 10 years that I sort of regretted it. It wasn't a positive experience. And in both cases, it was stretched almost too far, even for me, and they weren't funded. So that taught me an important lesson about at what point does my comfort zone become just kind of a disaster zone. Another thing is that I'm not highly constrained by an academic calendar, field work, travel, things like that. I don't have a really strict teaching calendar. There's a lot of flexibility in teaching these immersive semester courses, and that's been really nice as well. And I think something I've gained in the last 5 years is that I'm confident that I can switch those ratios between teaching, advising, grants, administrative, and leadership service when I need to. I think a good institution recognizes that there are things like burnout or that people might need to change things up every once in a while. So move away from intense grant writing and maybe take on a large education role or another leadership role. And I think it took me a while to figure that out. And now I'm confident I can make those switches when needed. And finally, and this is a very personal issue just for me, through interviewing for jobs over the last 12 years, I found some general discomfort that I didn't actually know I had until I was actually faced with some of the prospects of going to a variety of different institutions, both here and in other countries. And I have generally found myself happy staying in the nonprofit world, and it's where my comfort zone is. And surprisingly, it took me a long time to recognize that, but I'm glad that I've been able to recognize it. So what are some things to consider if you're looking at going into a soft money institution? Of course, are people successful there? What's their track record of people's career trajectories? Do people stick around? If they're leaving, are they going on to equal or better things? Really looking at the track record of the institution and its people. Very practically, what's the fallback plan? If you fall short on grant writing, if you're expected to bring in all your grant money and you fall short, will you still get a paycheck? For 11 years now, I've never missed a paycheck. And, that obviously I need to pay my mortgage and send my children to college. So that's been a nice thing. And again, sort of looking kind of deep inside, really how comfortable or uncomfortable are you with uncertainty? Basic scientific research, there's a huge amount of uncertainty, no matter what position you're in. And this is something you really need to evaluate with yourself. When looking at other institutions, trying to understand how and if people get compensated for work beyond grantsmanship, for service, for administration, for teaching. If they do, is that encouraged? Is it required? Is it looked down upon? How do people view those things? And are there sources of competitive internal funding, both for you or for students or postdocs? What's the success rate? Many soft money institutions, ranging from government to nonprofits, do have internal funding that helps get new projects off the ground without having to compete on the national stage, and is really critical to the success of many faculty there. And just a few other things. You need to get a deal in writing. Can you? And if so, what length of job security does it provide? And perhaps most important, whether you're looking at soft money or not, do people feel respected? Do they feel like they're crucial to the institution's mission? And do they like their colleagues? These are things you need to consider no matter where you go. And I think a lot of people, like me at least, stay in soft money, perhaps because of, this final point where they feel valued, they understand an institution's mission, they like the people they're surrounded with, and they're really set up for success. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions. I'm just going to see if my webcam's going to work, but that was all I had prepared.
Wonderful. Thank you, Julie. At this time, we'll take any questions if you want to put them in the chat box. All right. I will read them off to you, Julie. Jesse asks, regarding how you spent your time, did you log this at the end of each day, every day for the past 12 plus years?
God, no. When I was going to get my initial 3-year contract renewed, I did it for the first 3 years. And then when I was going up for promotion from assistant to associate, I did it again. And then every 2 years or so, I had an administrator who did it for me. And that's basically how I, kind of kept track of it. That was really for how I charged my time. How I actually spent my time, it's really my best guess, of how I spend my time. I don't track it or log it day by day at all. I probably should. I don't know, it might depress me. I don't know.
Got it. I was wondering, since there was less or no focus on the tenure process at MBL, how did you decide which committees to be on, if at all, or admin leadership roles, things that are looked at when considering tenure?
Yeah, there are a lot of opportunities to serve on committees related to PhD committees of folks. I had an appointment at Brown University, so I could serve on PhD committees and have students. And then also there were a number of advisory groups within the institution that I was asked to participate in. I was the associate director of my department for a while, so I helped deal with, promotions, finances, and things like that. So service to the institution, it sort of happened organically, to be honest.
Did you find that it was easier to turn down committees? Did you feel less obligated to serve?
I did not find it easy to turn down at all, especially because on many of those committees I was the only woman, which is a very common problem. So, part of me knew I was being asked simply because of my gender. There was also an age skew where I was often the youngest person in the room. It's not that way anymore, thankfully. But I felt, an internal obligation in some ways to say yes. But I was protected from it the first couple of years, basically by my department chair who didn't ask. And so I wasn't put in an uncomfortable position to say no.
Got it. And Karen, I think you addressed this already. So how did you decide how to charge your time? And Jesse wants to know, can you speak to burnout or turnover frequency in soft money positions, either anecdotally or with any data you've seen? And if folks leave more often due to lack of funding or other considerations?
That's a big question. I don't have a lot of data. Just from my limited experience at these two institutions, a lot of people have left and achieved tenure at other institutions. And many of them simply didn't like the stress of thinking even about raising all that money, even if they were wildly successful at doing it. And, after some of those transitions, I've kept in touch with a number of those people, and, they're very honest that the job security is great, but that there are negatives that, they knew they were going to be negatives, things like having to do more teaching and university service and things like that. Other people have left because they realize maybe their research goals they can't achieve within the constraints of some of these smaller institutions or federal institutions. And C-DEBI is a really good example of that, where you have to have a large institutional support, a cost share basically. And USC has invested heavily in C-DEBI. It helped us get funded in the first place, and it continues to keep us supported. And those are much harder, large programs to run at some of these smaller institutions. So that's also a reason that I know people have left. I think there's a lot of people who move from one to the other. I also, from soft money to hard, but I also know a number of people in my own department here who left hard money for soft money simply because they were unhappy at the institution they were at for a variety of reasons. Institutions that they probably could have gotten tenure in, but decided to leave even before those decisions were made. I do think burnout is real. I think everybody experiences, whether you're, the fanciest tenured professor at the fanciest university or not. And I think any good institution recognizes it and provides support and opportunities, maybe to just take a break from, the science that you've been doing for 15 years, think big about something else, maybe take a short sabbatical, maybe do a pivot point in your career, or get some experience in leadership and administration. So I think a good institution allows their faculty to explore those different opportunities.
Great. Jackie wants to know, talking about backup plans for if you have a couple of bad years of getting grants funded. Is there institutional support for this, or is it something folks have to figure out on their own? Is there room for support for your colleagues / community for their rough years? And what are some examples of backup plans?
The two institutions I've been at, it's an endowment draw, and both institutions have handled it very differently, and there's different processes for that money. Sometimes it's within the department, sometimes it's controlled in the academic office, sometimes it's very casual, just a meeting with your department chair saying, I need 3 months of support to get these big papers out so I can write the next couple grants. But it took me a while, especially at my first institution, to understand the transparency of that process. It was really handled within department, whereas where I am now, it's handled at a higher level. And so I know people at a lot of different places who have been floated for multiple years as they do one of these large pivots in particular, and the institution has supported them. It's often paid off. I also know examples of faculty who, after a year or two, it was sort of a mutual decision between them and the institution that it was no longer going to work out, just because either the area of science was no longer in line with the institution's mission, or the program that had funded them for the previous 15 years had disappeared, and there weren't a lot of other options. So I think it really depends. At universities, you obviously have more options like teaching to fall back on when you fall up short, and we'd have to hear more from research faculty who have that experience to find out how easy or not easy it is to get those opportunities.
All right. If there are not any other questions, no one seems to be typing. Oh, okay. Never mind. Just kidding. Jesse wants to know, they almost never see soft money positions advertised other than at institutes that are entirely soft money. How does one find or initiate a soft money position at an institute not advertising soft money positions? Am I looking at the wrong job boards?
Well, when I applied for the job at MBL and the job here at Hui, they were not advertised as soft money positions. They were advertised as faculty positions. And I think that reflects that in both situations, the institution supports the candidate or supports the faculty line ultimately. And I know there are a lot of short-term contracts and government jobs that are explicitly soft money, as well as in medical schools. But I think you're right, Jesse, that it's usually not explicit in the ad because of all these shades of gray. And I also think they probably don't want to turn off people from applying. I think some folks end up in soft money positions at some places where they move from their postdoc, they want to stay at an institution, there's not a more permanent line open, and so they move into one of these research faculty positions. They either have a lead PI who has the grant support, or during their postdoc they were able to raise funding to support their salary longer. And sometimes people are staying in these research faculty positions for quite a long time. They're not, because the institution doesn't have to invest in them the way they do a tenured faculty line. They often come and go. They're often not advertised. They happen more organically. And again, that's where talking to other research faculty at a variety of institutions might be helpful.
Okay, so I think we are done with questions. With that, I want to thank Julie again for a great webinar on stuff that people do, but we don't quite know how to get there. So I think that was really useful. Thanks a lot, Julie. And we will be having another C-DEBI webinar coming in April. So stay tuned.
All right, thanks everyone.
Yeah, thanks, Julie.